Vivek, some say ESG is the future. Many in Canada are falling over themselves trying to show their ESG bona fides. Elon Musk recently said ESG is the devil. FTX has a better ESG score than Tesla, yet FTX is now bankrupt. Sri Lanka's ESG score was great, and now they've collapsed. A very large cement maker in the world was fined $750 million recently for giving millions to a Syrian terrorist organization, and today it wraps itself in the ESG blanket. Well, what are we to make of all of this?
I think it is a deflection tactic. It is a way for the people in power to aggregate more profit and power for themselves while pretending like they care about something other than profit and power. I think it is the defining scam of the 21st century. And it's a scam on both capitalism and democracy. On one hand, I think this causes companies to be less successful. Yes, a lot of proponents in the ESG movement like to claim that this is just about long-run value creation. That is a farce. That does not reflect the actual stated motivations of most shareholder proposals for ESG measures, like the ones that I was mentioning earlier, like emissions caps or racial equity audits in the hiring programs of companies. That has nothing to do with long-run value creation. It has to do with advancing a social agenda that leads companies to be less successful at making goods and services, at deriving a profit, at contributing to the economy. That was Milton Friedman's concern, by the way, and I agree with him. But I worry even more about the way it drains the lifeblood out of a democratic body politic, because it says that now it's not the everyday citizen who gets a voice in saying how or whether we fight climate change or racial injustice, but we delegate that authority to a small group of corporate actors that no one ever elected and that has no political backstop or accountability to the decisions they make. That's why I think it's a threat not just to capitalism, but to democratic self-governance itself. And it's a scam because the people who are actually getting to define what counts as ESG friendly or not get to make a lot more money and aggregate a lot more political power as a consequence.
So essentially, they're using other people's money to push their political agenda.
That's right. It's an abuse of funds. It's an abuse of OPM, as I call it, other people's money. If you want to push it with your own money, it's a free country and you're free to do that.
Sure.
But you can't use somebody else's money to do it without their consent and their permission. And you know what? If you ask most people, do you want to advance racial quota systems or emissions caps with your money versus just making as much money as possible? You know what they'll say? Heck no, absolutely not. And that's exactly why they have tried to not ask for that permission and make this system as opaque as it is. That's why I'm on a mission to educate people about, you know what? It's your money. You deserve to know what you're doing with it. At least you're empowered to make that choice. And I think as more people become educated about this issue, I think that's ultimately how we solve it through the market.
It seems that pension funds came out overnight almost and started talking about ESG. But I didn't really ever see any due diligence around that. They just started talking about it out of the blue. How did that happen? How do you think it happened?
Well, I think one of the precipitating factors, this is part of why I wrote Woke Inc. I'm going to write another book about ESG likely in the 2023 timeframe. So it takes a book length work to explain fully. But one of the precipitating factors was when President Trump in the United States pulled out of the Paris Climate Accords around 2018. That was one of those catalysts that really caused business leaders and private sector asset allocators, including in pension funds, to say that, well, you know what? If government isn't going to step up to the plate to address shared global challenges like climate change, then the private sector needs to step up to the challenge instead. And so that's when they started telling the companies they invested in, or even the asset managers to whom those pension funds gave money, what they said was, we're not going to do business with you. We're not going to invest in you unless you agree to adopt the standards of the Paris Climate Accords, unless you agree to adopt net zero standards by 2050, unless you agree to adopt modern diversity, equity, and inclusion standards, where they, of course, define what diversity means. So that was a big precipitating factor. I think Trump's election, followed by the Paris Climate Accords decision, was something that caused private sector actors and pension funds in particular to say that we need to step up to the plate and solve this problem instead. The only problem is they didn't actually get the permission from their pension fund plan participants, the everyday pensioners who thought that they were entrusting their money with someone who was looking exclusively after their financial interests to now look after these so-called collateral benefits, as they call them as well. And I think that's where the fraud begins.
Extraordinary. Here in Canada, we've had a hard time developing our own energy sector. The world could use so much more energy. And we seem to be handcuffed by these ESG measures. Truly, that is the solution to the problem. But ESG is being used to stop the development of energy. I'm sure that's happening all over the world.
I think it is happening all over the world. And you got to look at the hypocrisy. On one hand, this is a movement that even through government policy then calls for the cancellation of the Keystone XL pipeline, which could have delivered valuable energy all the way down from Canada, all the way down to the southern border of the United States.
Hold that thought. We'll pick it up after the break.